I'm Genesis, 32 female. For most of my life, I lived by a simple code instilled by my father: build things that last. Ironic, considering my first major attempt to build something for myself ended in a spectacular collapse that almost took me down with it. I live in a small but comfortable apartment in the city, a place that became both my refuge and my prison after my business failed. It was supposed to be the story of my great success, but it turned into a cautionary tale whispered among my parents' friends. This story is about how the people who were supposed to be my foundation turned their backs on me at my lowest, and how I built a new foundation without them, one they could never be a part of. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My father, Walter, is a civil engineer. He builds bridges, designs foundations for skyscrapers, and speaks in terms of load-bearing walls and structural integrity. Everything in his life, including his family, was expected to be solid, quantifiable, and above all, successful. He saw the world in blueprints and schematics, and there was no room for error or weakness. My mother, Alina, was a high-end real estate agent. Her world was one of curb appeal, staging, and closing deals. For her, success wasn't just about stability, it was about appearance. The right address, the right car, the right children with the right careers, it was all part of the portfolio she presented to the world. I grew up in a household that felt less like a home and more like a long-term project, a showcase of the family's achievements. My younger sister, Maya, was the exception. She had a gentle soul and a quiet strength my parents never quite understood. She chose to become an elementary school teacher, a profession my father publicly praised for its nobility but privately dismissed as a hobby. In his eyes, she wasn't building anything tangible. She was molding minds, a concept as foreign and unstable to him as building on sand. But Maya was happy. She had a purpose that came from within, not one that needed to be displayed on a balance sheet. I, on the other hand, had tried to play my father's game, but with a modern twist. I launched a digital marketing agency, Momentum Media. I was passionate, driven, and for a while, wildly successful. I built my business from a laptop in my spare bedroom into a bustling office downtown with 15 employees. I was the daughter Walter and Alina could finally brag about. I was featured in local business journals, spoke at tech conferences, and drove a car that signaled the right kind of success. My father would clap me on the back at family gatherings, his voice booming as he told his friends, "Genesis gets it. She's a builder, like me." My mother would show off photos of my sleek, modern office as if it were a new luxury listing. They loved the idea of my success. They loved the reflection it cast on them. The problem with momentum, however, is that it can go in both directions. The market shifted. A key client, responsible for nearly 40% of our revenue, was unexpectedly acquired by a larger corporation that had its own in-house marketing team. The contract was terminated. It was a massive blow, but I thought we could weather it. I poured my savings into keeping the company afloat, trying to land new clients to fill the gaping hole in our finances. But the industry was in a downturn. Companies were slashing marketing budgets, and the big fish weren't biting. For 6 months, I fought. I worked 18-hour days, took out loans, and laid off employees I considered friends. Each step felt like I was dismantling my dream piece by piece. The vibrant, energetic office grew quiet and empty. The calls from creditors grew louder. The confident woman who spoke at conferences was replaced by a hollow-eyed version of herself, staring at spreadsheets in the dead of night, desperately trying to find a solution that didn't exist. My house of cards, built with so much passion and ambition, was trembling. It started with a single card slipping, the loss of that major client, and soon the entire structure began to sway. The foundation I thought was so solid was nothing but air. My father, the man of structural integrity, had taught me how to build but not how to handle a collapse. I was about to find out that his support was as conditional as a fair weather forecast. The final, inevitable gust of wind was coming, and I was standing right in the middle of the fallout zone, completely alone. The official end came on a Tuesday in late October. It was a gray, drizzly day that perfectly matched my mood. I stood in the empty office, the for lease sign already taped to the front window, and signed the final bankruptcy papers. The lawyer was sympathetic in a detached, professional way. He'd seen this 100 times. For him, it was just paperwork. For me, it was the closing chapter of my identity. Momentum Media was gone. My savings were gone. My reputation, I feared, was next. I drove home in a daze, the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers counting out my failures. The first call I had to make was to my parents. I dreaded it more than the call to the bank. The bank just wanted money. My parents wanted a success story, and I no longer had one to give. I rehearsed the conversation in my head, trying to find the right words to soften the blow, to frame it not as a failure, but as a learning experience. I called my mother first, thinking she'd be the gentler entry point. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking slightly, "it's over, the business. I had to close it down." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. "Oh, honey," she finally said, her voice strained. "Oh, dear, what will people think?" That was her first question. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What do you need?" But, "What will people think?" The question hung in the air, cold and sharp. I mumbled something about the market and bad luck, but I could feel her disappointment radiating through the phone. "Your father is not going to take this well, Genesis," she warned. "You know how he is about these things. Let me talk to him first. I'll call you back." She didn't call back for 2 days. In that time, I was adrift in a sea of shame and anxiety. I barely ate. I replayed every decision, every mistake, wondering what I could have done differently. My sister, Maya, was my only lifeline. She called the moment she heard. She didn't offer business advice or platitudes. She just listened. She let me cry, rage, and whisper my fears without judgment. "You are more than your company, Jen," she said softly. "Don't ever forget that." The call from my father finally came on Friday evening. I answered with a knot in my stomach. "Genesis," he said. No greeting, no warmth. His voice was flat, like a surveyor reading measurements. "Your mother told me the news. I have to say, I'm not surprised. This is what happens when you build on trends and clicks instead of concrete and steel." The condescension was a physical blow. "Dad, it was a solid business," I argued weakly. "The market just turned." "A solid business doesn't collapse," he retorted. "It withstands pressure. You overextended, you were reckless. You built a house of cards and acted surprised when it fell." He went on, his voice a relentless hammer, chipping away at what little self-worth I had left. He spoke of the embarrassment, the money I'd lost, some of which was an early and very small investment from him that I'd paid back with interest years ago, and the shame I had brought on the family name. The final, crushing blow came when I mentioned the upcoming holidays. Thanksgiving was just a few weeks away. "I guess I'll be seeing you guys for Thanksgiving, then," I said, hoping for a sliver of familial comfort. There was a chilling silence. Then, he delivered the line that would echo in my mind for years. "Actually, Genesis, your mother and I have talked about it, and we don't think it's a good idea for you to come this year." I was speechless. Why?" "Honestly," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "we just can't handle the disappointment right now. Having you at the table with everyone asking what you're doing now, it's just too much. It's better if you just stay away for a while. We need some space." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. He had disinvited me from Thanksgiving, from Christmas. He had cast me out because my failure was an inconvenience to his pristine public image. It wasn't just a rejection, it was an amputation. He was cutting off the diseased limb to save the body. I was the failure, the disappointment, the part of the family blueprint that had to be erased. The cold that seeped into my bones that day had nothing to do with the October weather. It was the deepest, most profound chill of my life, the cold of knowing I was utterly and completely alone, abandoned by the very man who claimed to have taught me how to build. The weeks that followed my father's decree were a blur of gray. The world outside my apartment continued on, but inside, time seemed to stand still. I was adrift in a fog of depression and shame. My days were formless, spent mostly on the couch, watching mindless television or staring at the ceiling. Sleep was a temporary escape, but I would wake up each morning with a heavy, suffocating weight on my chest, the memory of my father's words fresh and raw. "We can't handle the disappointment." It was a verdict and a sentence. Thanksgiving came and went. I saw pictures on social media posted by a cousin. There they were. My parents, my aunts, uncles, and cousins all gathered around a perfectly set dining table. My mother was smiling, holding a platter of turkey. My father was at the head of the table, carving the bird, looking patriarchal and proud. There was an empty chair next to my sister Maya, a space that felt like it was screaming my absence. Maya called me that day, her voice a hushed whisper from a bathroom down the hall. "I miss you, Jen," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is so wrong. I told them it was wrong." "What did they say?" I asked, my own voice a hoarse croak. "Dad said it was for the best, that it would be too uncomfortable for everyone." Mom just kept changing the subject, asking people if they wanted more wine. "She's acting like nothing happened, like you just decided not to come." That hurt almost as much as my father's directness. My mother's denial, her desperate need to smooth over the cracks in her perfect family portrait, was its own kind of betrayal. She wasn't a monster. She was a coward, ruled by her fear of what others thought. After that call, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a sudden burst of energy or a miraculous recovery. It was a tiny, flickering ember of anger deep within the ashes of my despair. It was the first thing I had felt other than sadness in weeks. How dare they? How dare they sit there, celebrating family and gratitude after disowning one of their own for a business failure? How dare they prioritize the comfort of their guests over the well-being of their daughter? That ember of anger became my fuel. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me off the couch. I started small. I cleaned my apartment, which had descended into a state of chaotic neglect. I threw away old business plans and stacks of useless paperwork from my failed company. It was a painful but necessary ritual, clearing out the remnants of my old life to make space for something new. I started taking long walks, just to feel the cold winter air on my face and remind myself that the world was bigger than my parents' judgment. During one of these walks, I ended up at a coffee shop and, out of old habit, opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just browsing online, trying to feel connected to the world again. I stumbled upon a forum for small business owners who had experienced failure. The stories were raw and honest. People spoke of losing everything, their companies, their homes, their marriages. But they also spoke of what came next. They spoke of resilience, of lessons learned, and of starting over, smarter and stronger. For the first time, I didn't feel so alone. My failure wasn't a unique, personal stain. It was a part of the entrepreneurial journey that no one liked to talk about. Reading those stories, I realized my father's perspective was fundamentally flawed. He saw my business collapsing as the end of the story. But what if it was just the end of a chapter? It was in that coffee shop, surrounded by the quiet hum of strangers' lives, that I found a glimmer of an idea. One of my biggest strengths at Momentum Media had been in a very specific niche, helping small, sustainable brands find their voice and market share against huge corporate competitors. I was good at it because I believed in it. I loved helping the underdogs win. My company had failed because I had become too dependent on one big, corporate client, the very thing I advised my smaller clients against. The irony was painful, but the lesson was clear. What if I went back to that? Not by building another big agency, but by starting smaller, leaner, and more focused. What if I became a consultant? I could work for myself with minimal overhead. I could choose my clients, the ones whose missions I truly believed in. The idea was terrifying. It meant putting myself out there again, risking another failure. But this time, the fear was different. It was overshadowed by the burning need to prove my father wrong. Not just to him, but to myself. I needed to prove that my worth wasn't tied to a company logo or a balance sheet. I went home, and for the first time in months, I didn't open my laptop to numb my mind with streaming services. I opened it to work. I started drafting a new business plan. It wasn't a house of cards. It was a blueprint for a foundation. My own foundation, built not with my father's approval, but on the hard-earned lessons of my own failure. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time since that devastating phone call, I could see a path through the darkness. It was a faint glimmer in the ashes, but it was enough. The transition from despair to determination wasn't a straight line. There were days I woke up with the familiar weight of failure on my chest, the temptation to crawl back under the covers and hide from the world almost overwhelming. But the anger, now refined into a cold, hard resolve, kept me moving forward. My new mission was simple. I would rebuild my life on my own terms, and my success would be my own. My first step was to reach OT to my old network. This was the most humbling part of the process. I had to call people who had known me as the successful CEO of Momentum Media and admit that I was starting over from scratch. I expected pity, or worse, awkward silence. Instead, I found a surprising amount of support. Many of them knew the client I had lost and understood that my company's collapse was more a case of bad luck than incompetence. One of my former clients, a woman named Sarah who ran a small company that made organic skincare products, became my first new client. "Genesis," she said over coffee, "your team's work was the best we ever had. You understood our mission. If you're consulting, we're in. We can't pay you what we used to, but we can pay something." That something was barely enough to cover my rent, but it was a start. It was a vote of confidence that felt more valuable than any large contract I had ever landed. I poured all my energy into Sarah's company. I rebuilt her website, optimized her social media strategy, and crafted a marketing campaign that was authentic and compelling. Within 3 months, her online sales had doubled. Word of mouth began to spread through the small business community. Sarah told another business owner who told another. Soon, I had a handful of clients, all in the sustainable and ethical products space. I was working from my apartment, my overhead was practically zero, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of control. I wasn't just building brands for my clients, I was rebuilding my own. I named my new consultancy Phoenix Strategy, a nod to rising from the ashes. During this time, my only family contact was my sister, Maya. She was my silent cheerleader, celebrating every small win with me. She never pushed me to reconcile with our parents. She understood that the wound was too deep. "They'll come around eventually," she'd say. "Their pride can't last forever." "Maybe," I'd reply, "but I'm not waiting for them." My parents made no effort to contact me. Christmas passed without a word. My mother sent a generic, unsigned Christmas card that felt more like an automated marketing email than a gesture of affection. My birthday in February was met with the same cold silence. It was clear their position hadn't changed. As far as they were concerned, I was still the family disappointment, and they were content to keep me at a distance. The pain of their rejection was still there, a dull ache that surfaced in quiet moments. But it was no longer the all-consuming grief it had once been. It was becoming a scar, a permanent part of me, but one that no longer bled. My work became my therapy. Each successful campaign, each glowing client testimonial, was another brick in the new foundation I was laying for myself. About a year into my new venture, I landed a major project. A national organic food chain wanted me to overhaul their entire digital presence. It was a huge undertaking, far bigger than anything I had handled on my own. It would require me to scale up, to hire contractors, and to prove that my one-woman operation could deliver results on a national level. The risk was immense, but so was the potential reward. I hesitated for a moment, the ghost of my past failure whispering doubts in my ear. Was I being reckless again? Was I overextending? But this time was different. I wasn't chasing explosive growth for the sake of appearances. I was building slowly, deliberately. My business model was lean and adaptable. I wasn't building a house of cards, I was building a fortress, stone by stone. I took the contract. For the next 6 months, I lived and breathed that project. I hired a small team of talented freelancers, many of whom had worked for me at my old company and were thrilled to collaborate again. We worked tirelessly, driven by a shared vision. My sister, Maya, was a constant source of encouragement, dropping off food at my apartment when she knew I was working too late to cook and reminding me to take breaks. The campaign launched in the fall, almost 2 years to the day since my father had disowned me. The results were immediate and staggering. The clients' online engagement skyrocketed. Their sales saw a 30% increase in the first quarter. The campaign won an industry award, and my name, Genesis and Phoenix Strategy, was suddenly attached to one of the biggest marketing success stories of the year. The articles started appearing in the same business journals that had once featured Momentum Media. But this time, the narrative was different. It wasn't about a fast-rising star, it was about resilience. It was the story of a comeback, of a founder who had lost everything and built something even stronger from the ashes. I had forged a new path, not by avoiding the fire of failure, but by walking through it and coming out the other side, stronger and tempered like steel. The best part was, I had done it all without a single word of encouragement or support from the people who were supposed to be my biggest advocates. And now, the world was taking notice. It was only a matter of time before they would, too. The success of the national campaign was a turning point. It didn't just put Phoenix Strategy on the map, it redrew the map entirely. The trickle of client inquiries turned into a flood. I was no longer chasing work. I was carefully selecting the projects that aligned with my values and vision. I moved out of my apartment office and into a chic, minimalist co-working space. I hired my first full-time employee, then a second. My consultancy was growing, but this time, the growth was controlled, sustainable, and entirely on my terms. I was making more money than I ever had with Momentum Me. But the financial success was secondary to the profound sense of personal accomplishment. I had proven to myself that my first success wasn't a fluke and that my failure wasn't a final judgment on my capabilities. Every morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose that was deeply, unshakably my own. It wasn't tied to anyone else's approval or validation. My public profile grew. I was invited to speak at conferences again, not as a young upstart, but as an expert in brand resilience. I told my story, the real story, including the painful collapse of my first company. I spoke about the importance of learning from failure, of building a business with a strong ethical core, and of defining success for oneself. My honesty resonated with people. I received emails and messages from entrepreneurs all over the world, thanking me for being transparent about my struggles. Throughout this silent ascent, the wall of silence from my parents remained intact. It had been over 3 years since the phone call, and I hadn't seen or spoken to them since. Maya was my only connection, providing quiet updates. She told me they were aware of my success. A family friend had apparently forwarded one of the articles about me to my mother. "What did she say?" I asked Maya, a familiar knot tightening in my stomach. "She didn't say much," Maya replied hesitantly. "She just said, 'Oh, that's nice for her,' and changed the subject. Dad saw it too. He just grunted and said you probably got lucky." Their reaction, or lack thereof, was a fresh sting. Even now, with undeniable public proof of my success, they couldn't bring themselves to offer a single word of acknowledgement or pride. It was then I truly understood that their issue had never been about my failure. It was about their control. When I was successful on their terms, I was a source of pride. When I failed, I was a source of shame. And now that I was successful on my own terms, without them, I was an uncomfortable reminder of their own misjudgment, a narrative they couldn't shape or take credit for. My resolve hardened. My journey was no longer about proving them wrong, it was about living well for myself. I bought a beautiful condo in the city, decorated it exactly to my taste, and filled it with friends and laughter. I traveled. I reconnected with hobbies I had abandoned. I built a life that was rich and full, a life where my parents' approval was simply not a required component. The first crack in their wall of silence appeared about 4 years after my exile. It was an email from my mother. The subject line was "Thinking of you." The email itself was brief and airy. She mentioned she had seen another article about me and thought my new office looked lovely. She then went on to talk about her garden club and a recent trip they had taken. It was a classic Aliner maneuver, acknowledging the elephant in the room just enough to pretend it wasn't there, then quickly pivoting to trivialities. There was no apology, no mention of the holidays I'd spent alone, no acknowledgement of the years of silence. It was an invitation to pretend everything was normal. I stared at the email for a long time. The old Genesis would have jumped at this tiny breadcrumb of affection. She would have replied immediately, desperate to be welcomed back into the fold, but I was not the old Genesis. I had survived the coldest winter on my own. I had forged my own path. I didn't need their conditional warmth now. I typed a simple, polite reply. "Thank you, I'm glad to hear you are well." I didn't ask about my father. I didn't ask about the family. I didn't offer any personal details. I gave her nothing to latch onto, nothing to use as a bridge back into my life on her terms. It was a response that was civil but closed. A few weeks later, my father tried a different approach. He called my office number, bypassing my cell phone. My assistant put him through, assuming it was a personal call. "Genesis," his voice boomed through the speaker, laced with a forced, unfamiliar cheerfulness. "Walter here, just calling to say congratulations on all the success. Knew you had it in you all along." The audacity of that statement, "knew you had it in you all along," was breathtaking. This was the same man who had told me he couldn't handle the disappointment of my presence. The same man who had called my business a house of cards. The revisionist history was so blatant it was almost comical. "Hello, Walter," I said, my voice calm and even. I intentionally used his first name, creating a subtle but clear distance. He seemed taken aback for a second before plowing ahead. "Listen, your mother and I were thinking it's been too long. We need to get the whole family together. We're planning a big dinner at the country club in a few weeks. We'd love for you to be there. Time to let bygones be bygones, eh?" There it was, the summons. Not an apology, not a request for forgiveness, but a command to appear at a pubble. Ike venue where they could showcase their successful daughter and smooth over the past as if it were a minor misunderstanding. The silent ascent was over. They had seen how high I had climbed, and now they wanted to stand beside me at the summit and pretend they had helped me get there. But they had no idea what I had been planning during my climb. They thought they were extending an invitation, but I was about to send one of my own. The phone call with my father left a bitter taste in my mouth. Let bygones be bygones. The phrase was so dismissive, so utterly devoid of understanding for the profound hurt he had caused. He wasn't seeking reconciliation, he was seeking restoration of the family image. My success had made me a valuable asset again, and it was time to put me back on display. Over the next few days, the pressure campaign began. My mother started calling, leaving cheerful, chattering voicemails as if our 4-year estrangement had been a brief holiday. "Genesis, darling, I found the most perfect dress for the dinner at the club. It would look wonderful on you." Then came the texts from distant aunts and uncles, likely prompted by my parents. "Heard you're doing so well. Can't wait to see you at the family dinner." It was a coordinated effort to make me feel that my attendance was a foregone conclusion, that refusing would be an act of unreasonable stubbornness. They were trying to create a narrative where they were the gracious, forgiving parents, and I was the difficult child holding a grudge. They were masters of staging, and this was their grand production of a family reunion. But I had been writing my own script. For months, ever since the success of the national campaign had become undeniable, I had been thinking about this moment. I knew it would come. My parents were predictable in their opportunism. I had debated various scenarios. A fiery confrontation, a cold, permanent silence, neither felt right. A public outburst would only make me look unstable, playing into their hands. Silence would allow them to control the narrative, to tell everyone I was simply too busy or too arrogant to come. I needed something else, something quiet, dignified, and utterly devastating in its clarity. An action that would speak louder than any words I could shout, and I found it. A week before their planned reunion dinner, I put my own plan into motion. I sent out a series of invitations of my own. They were for a small, exclusive dinner party I was hosting at my condo on the same night as their country club event. The guest list was small but significant. I invited Maya, of course. I invited Sarah, my first client who had believed in me when I had nothing. I invited the small team of freelancers who had helped me land the national campaign. I invited a few key figures from the business community who had mentored and supported me. It was a celebration of the family I had built for myself, a family based not on blood, but on loyalty, respect, and mutual support. I also sent an invitation to my parents. It was delivered by courier, a thick, cream-colored card in an elegant envelope. It was not an invitation to my dinner party. It was a carefully crafted package. Inside, there was a single, beautifully printed card. On the front, it simply said, "A thank you from Genesis." When they opened it, they would not find an RSVP to their event. Instead, they would find a short, simple letter from me. It read, "Dear Walter and Alina, I have received your messages regarding the family dinner. It has given me cause to reflect on the past few years. When my first business failed, I was told that my presence was a disappointment you couldn't handle. I was uninvited from our family's table because my failure was an embarrassment to you. I spent the holidays alone, rebuilding my life from nothing, without a single word of support. I have since built a new life and a new business, this time on a foundation of resilience and authenticity, not on the hollow pursuit of appearances. The success you are so eager to celebrate now was achieved not because of you, but in spite of your abandonment. Tonight, I am hosting a dinner in my home. I will be raising a glass to the people who truly supported me, the friends, colleagues, and mentors who stood by me in the ashes and helped me rise. This is the table where I belong now. You are not invited. You wanted me to let bygones be bygones, but I will not. Some things should not be forgotten. My absence from your dinner is not an act of spite. It is a final boundary. It is the consequence of the choice you made 4 years ago. You taught me that your love and acceptance were conditional. I have finally learned to accept your terms. Sincerely, Genesis. Along with the letter, I included a single, final item, a check. It was for the exact amount of the small investment my father had made in my first company all those years ago. It was a symbolic gesture. It was my declaration of independence, severing the last financial thread that had ever connected us. I didn't owe him the money, I had already paid him back with interest, but this was about making a statement. I owed them nothing. The courier confirmed the package was delivered on the afternoon of their dinner. I could only imagine the scene, my mother, dressed for the club, opening the elegant envelope with anticipation, only to find that cold, quiet rejection. My father, reading the words and seeing the check, realizing that his power over me was gone. He could no longer claim any part of my success. I had bought myself free. That evening, my condo was filled with warmth, laughter, and genuine affection. We ate good food, drank good wine, and celebrated our shared successes. Maya was there, her eyes shining with pride. "I've never been prouder to be your sister," she whispered to me. My phone buzzed several times throughout the evening with calls from my parents' numbers. I ignored them. I didn't need to hear their anger or their panicked attempts at damage control. My letter was my final word. It was the unsent invitation to a life they could have been part of, a door I had now quietly, firmly, and permanently closed. There was no screaming, no drama. Just the quiet, satisfying click of a lock falling into place. The aftermath of my unsent invitation was not the explosion I had braced for, but a series of quiet, pathetic implosions. According to Maya, who had dutifully gone to the country club dinner to run interference, my absence was the gaping hole in the center of the evening. My parents had told the assembled family that I had a last-minute, unavoidable work commitment. But the lie was thin, and the tension was thick. My empty chair was a monument to their failure. My letter and the check had apparently sent my father into a silent, simmering rage. My mother had dissolved into tears, not of remorse, but of social humiliation. The perfectly staged family reunion had been sabotaged, and they had no one to blame but themselves. The narrative had been ripped from their control, and the truth, as I had laid it out, was undeniable. In the weeks that followed, they tried everything. The angry voicemails came first, mostly from my father, accusing me of being cruel, ungrateful, and vindictive. Then came the pleading texts from my mother, filled with vague promises to talk things through and fix this. They even sent my favorite aunt as an ambassador to try and broker a peace treaty. I met with my aunt out of respect for her, but my position was firm. "This isn't about forgiveness," I explained to her over coffee. "I have forgiven them for my own peace of mind, but forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean I have to let people back into my life who have proven they will only hurt me. I'm not punishing them, I'm protecting myself." She listened, and to her credit, she seemed to understand. "I never agreed with what they did, Genesis," she said sadly. "You've built something wonderful for yourself. You keep protecting it." The most significant change was in my relationship with Maya. Freed from the pressure of trying to mediate an impossible situation, our bond grew even stronger. She had seen my parents' true colors and had chosen to stand with me. While she still maintained a relationship with them, it was different now. She no longer catered to their whims or made excuses for their behavior. She had drawn her own boundaries, inspired by mine. Our family was no longer defined by our parents' house, but by the sisterhood we shared. As for me, my life continued its upward trajectory. Phoenix strategy thrived. I bought the co-working space we were in and turned it into a collaborative hub for ethical startups, paying forward the support I had received. I found a healthy, loving relationship with a man who celebrated my strength and had stood by his own family through thick and thin. My world was full. About a year later, on the day before Thanksgiving, a package arrived at my office. It was from my mother. There was no card, no note. Inside was a small, worn photo album, as filled with pictures of me as a child. Me on my first day of school, me at my piano recitals, me laughing with my father on a family vacation. It was a pathetic, desperate last-ditch effort, an attempt to remind me of a time when I was theirs, a time when I had needed them. I looked through the album and I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt a strange sense of pity. They had missed the entire point. My happiness wasn't a rejection of that little girl in the photos. It was a fulfillment of her potential in a way they never could have orchestrated. They thought my success was the story, but they were wrong. The real story was my survival. I put the album on a shelf in my closet and didn't look at it again. My life is my own now. My table is filled with people I choose, people who have earned their seat through loyalty and love. Sometimes I think about my parents. I picture them in their big, quiet house, a house that was always more of a showcase than a home. I imagine them sitting at their long dining table with empty chairs that echo with the ghosts of their own bad choices. My father taught me about building things with strong foundations. It's the one lesson of his that I truly took to heart. I built my life on a foundation of self-respect, integrity, and the courage to walk away from a structure that was rotten to its core. He built his family like a house of cards, and he was shocked when it collapsed. I built mine like a fortress. And from within its walls, I am safe, I am happy, and I am free. My father may sit at the head of his table, but it is a table for one, ruling over an empty kingdom of his own making.